They say every family has its secrets. Some are small, forgotten stories, whispered betrayals, names erased from photographs. But in the summer of 1962, in a quiet American town that doesn't appear on most maps anymore, a secret was born that would stain an entire bloodline. It began with a birth that wasn't supposed to happen. The mother, Margaret Hensley, was only 23. Her husband, Daniel, was a respected war veteran who came back from Korea with a limp and a 1,000-yard stare. To the neighbors, they looked like a picture of mid-century American perfection: white picket fence, a flag fluttering on the porch, church on Sundays. But behind the curtains, there were rules. Rules no one talked about. The baby came early, 3 weeks before the due date. The doctor, an old man who had been delivering children for decades, said something strange in the delivery room. He looked at Margaret, then at her husband, and hesitated. Later that night, he left town without explanation. His clinic was found locked, the furniture covered in sheets, as if he'd been planning to leave for years. The child's name was Samuel. He grew up pale, quiet, and distant, with eyes that made people uncomfortable. He didn't cry often, but when he did, the sound had a strange echo, as if coming from somewhere far beyond the walls of that house. Daniel never spoke about his family back in Tennessee. Margaret never visited her relatives again. Their phone number was unlisted, and the neighbors began to notice something else. Each summer, the Hensleys took a trip up north, always on the same weekend. No one knew where they went. But every time they returned, the house seemed colder, the walls quieter, and the curtains drawn tighter than before. Years later, long after the family name had been forgotten, a box was discovered inside the attic of that house. Inside were letters, yellowed, brittle, and marked, "Do not open." And within those letters lay the truth that the Hensleys had tried to bury deeper than their own bones. A truth about bloodlines, about guilt that seeps through generations, and about a secret that was never meant to be spoken aloud. The letters were written in the same hand, though the ink changed color over time, from deep black to faded brown, as if the writer had kept returning year after year, unable to stop. The first was dated 1948, long before Samuel was born. It began simply, "To whoever finds this, understand that some things are better left buried." The signature read DH, the same initials as Samuel's father, Daniel Hensley. But the dates didn't line up. In 1948, Daniel would have been just 15, and the address written in the corner wasn't in their town. It was from a place 3 states away, in the Appalachian foothills, a town erased from modern maps by mining collapses and floods. The next letter was different. It wasn't a confession, it was a warning. "The sickness runs in the blood," it said. "We were told not to marry outside, not to bring strangers in. The elders said the blood must stay pure, or it would remember." No one knows who the elders were, or what "would remember" meant. But as the letters went on, the handwriting grew more erratic. By the 5th page, the lines trembled, slanted downward, as if the writer's hands had begun to shake. "We made a mistake," one letter read. She wasn't supposed to have the child. The last time one was born, it killed its mother before the year was done. But Margaret didn't listen. She said love was stronger than blood. Samuel grew up believing his father's limp came from the war. But the truth was written in those letters. The limp wasn't from shrapnel. It was punishment, a mark. Neighbors would sometimes hear strange noises at night, low murmurs, rhythmic tapping, like someone pacing a circle in the attic. Daniel said it was the house settling. But one night, a boy from across the street saw a flicker of light through the attic window. A light moving in patterns, pulsing, almost like it was trying to speak. When the boy told his parents, they laughed it off. But by the next year, the boy's family had moved away. No one else would buy that house for decades. And Samuel, he never spoke of the letters. But when he turned 15, the same age his father had been when those letters began, he started writing too. Samuel's writings were different from his father's. Where Daniel's letters trembled with guilt and warning, Samuel's words felt detached, clinical, almost fascinated. The first notebook began in 1977, written in blocky handwriting, each page carefully numbered. It started like a diary. "Mother says our family came from the mountains. Father says not to ask which ones. Then, sometimes I hear a song in my dreams. It's like someone humming in the walls. When I wake up, my ears ring." At first, no one noticed anything strange. Samuel did well in school, quiet but intelligent. The teachers said he had old soul. He read history books, spent hours in the library archives, fascinated with genealogy. But there was one subject that drew him in more than any other: bloodlines. He traced the Hensley name back to Tennessee, then further, to a cluster of families who had lived in a hollow that no longer existed, a place once called Red Hollow, now buried under a reservoir. Public records ended abruptly after 1912. No birth certificates, no death records, just silence. But Samuel found something in a church ledger, entries marked with an asterisk, then a strange symbol beside them, like two serpents intertwined. The handwriting matched the style of the old letters. The deeper he searched, the stranger the coincidences became. Every few generations, there was a child born early. Always sickly, always pale, always with the same gray eyes that seemed to catch light differently. Margaret used to say those eyes were beautiful. But after Samuel turned 16, she couldn't look at him anymore. She began sleeping downstairs, locking her door at night. Daniel started drinking again. Neighbors remember the sound of shouting, then silence. For weeks after, no one saw Margaret. Daniel told everyone she'd gone to visit her sister out of state. But no one ever met that sister, and no record of her ever existed. By the time Samuel was 18, the house had changed. Curtains drawn all the time, grass uncut, windows blacked out. Local kids dared each other to step onto the porch, but none made it past the first step, because sometimes, even in broad daylight, you could hear someone whispering from inside. Not crying, whispering. And then one night in December, the house went dark. For 3 days, no one saw a single light. On the fourth morning, Samuel was gone. They found the house empty. At least, that's what the police report said. No signs of struggle, no broken glass, no blood. But everything felt raw. The air inside was thick, heavy with the smell of damp wood and something older, metallic. The furniture was untouched, dust on every surface except one, the attic door handle. It was clean polished, as if it had been used again and again. The attic itself was something else entirely. The officers described it as arranged, candles, melted down to the base. Symbols painted on the floor, some in ink, some in what looked like dried rust. In the corner sat a small wooden box locked with 3 latches. No key. When they forced it open, they found a single object inside, a roll of film. When developed, the film revealed 6 photographs. Each showed a child, different ages, different decades. But every face looked disturbingly familiar. The same narrow features, the same gray eyes. And on the back of every photo, in that same shaky handwriting, one phrase. The line continues. The authorities dismissed it as the work of a disturbed mind. The house was condemned and sealed. Daniel Hensley was never found. Margaret's name was added to a missing persons list, and Samuel, officially, became a runaway. But unofficially, the story didn't end. In the years that followed, stories began to spread through nearby towns. People said they'd seen a figure walking along the edge of the old reservoir where Red Hollow had once been. A tall young man, pale with gray eyes that glowed faintly when light hit them. He never spoke, never approached anyone, just watched. When one reporter tried to investigate, digging into the Hensley history, his notes were stolen from his car. His audio tapes were found unspooled and melted in the sun. The only surviving recording is barely audible, a voice whispering beneath the static. It's not gone. It remembers. To this day, no one knows what was. Disease, curse, madness passed through generations. But some say the Hensleys weren't the only family bound by that blood. That in certain counties across Appalachia, there are still families who don't marry outsiders, who keep old symbols carved into their barns, who bury their dead in unmarked graves because names, they believe, make it easier for the blood to find you again. And somewhere out there, the line continues. By the 1990s, the Hensley name had become more of a ghost story than a family. Teenagers told tales about the gray-eyed boy who wandered the reservoir shore, waiting for someone with his blood to call him home. Most people laughed it off, but there were a few who didn't. One of them was a woman named Elaine Porter, a local genealogist who had spent years documenting forgotten Appalachian families. She stumbled onto the Hensley story by accident, tracing a missing branch of a neighboring family. What she found made her stop sleeping. Elaine discovered that the Hensleys weren't just another mountain family. They were part of something older. Their ancestors weren't from Tennessee originally. They came from the Carolinas in the early 1800s, part of a migration led by a preacher named Silas Hensley. Silas preached purity, not spiritual, but biological. He claimed that the blood of the chosen had power and mixing it with outsiders would dilute it. He built a settlement deep in the hollow, sealed from the outside world. Elaine's research grew darker the deeper she dug. The town records, what little remained, suggested that Silas had declared himself both prophet and patriarch. He arranged marriages, determined births, and oversaw cleansings. When the bloodline strayed, the last surviving document, dated 1889, was a burial record for 7 infants, all unnamed, all marked with the same twin serpent symbol found in the attic letters. Elaine tried to go public with her findings. She even recorded a radio interview, but before it aired, the tape went missing. Days later, her car was found abandoned near the reservoir. The only thing inside was a small paper envelope. Inside the envelope was a photograph. It was Samuel, older now, mid-30s, same eyes, same stillness. He was standing beside someone, a woman with his same features. Some said it was his mother. Others said it wasn't. And that was when the whispers started again. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you walk away, or would you search for the truth? Because the truth, as Elaine learned too late, doesn't like to stay buried. In 2003, a new family bought the old Hensley house. They didn't know its history. Most of the town's archives had been lost in a fire years earlier. The couple, the Marshalls, had 2 young children and thought they'd found a bargain, a large property at the edge of town, surrounded by trees and quiet fields. But from the first night, they knew something was wrong. It started with sound, soft footsteps in the attic above their bedroom, even though the only way up had been nailed shut by the previous owners. Then came the smell, iron, wet soil, and something faintly sweet, like rotting fruit. Mr. Marshall tried to blame it on old pipes, but no one could explain how it always returned. Strongest at exactly 3:17 a.m., their daughter Emily began waking up with drawings in her notebook, spirals, circles, and eventually the twin serpents. When asked where she'd seen it, she said a man with silver eyes taught her. Mrs. Marshall called the police once, saying she'd seen someone standing in the field behind the house at dawn. The man didn't move, just stared. By the time the officer arrived, he was gone. The only thing they found were footprints in the dew, leading nowhere. It wasn't until the family started renovating the basement that the truth resurfaced. Literally, beneath a layer of cement, they found an old wooden hatch. Inside was a narrow crawl space, lined with wooden boxes wrapped in cloth. Inside each box were old family relics, lockets, photographs, letters, and in the center, a cracked mirror with an inscription carved into its frame. The blood sees itself. When the Marshalls moved out just weeks later, they left everything behind. The furniture, the boxes, even their clothes. The house remains empty to this day. Locals say sometimes you can see candlelight flickering through the attic window again, just like in 1962. A paranormal investigator later tried to spend a night there. His video feed cut out after 23 minutes. The last frame caught him staring into that cracked mirror, whispering something no one could understand. When enhanced, the audio revealed 2 words, repeated over and over in a low, rhythmic voice. I remember. The house has been sealed again, but that doesn't matter. Because whatever was bound to the Hensley blood didn't die there. It moved on. Years passed. The Hensley property rotted beneath vines and moss, a skeleton of its former self. But then, almost exactly 60 years after Samuel's birth, a woman in Boston took a DNA test. Her name was Claire Donovan, a schoolteacher, 32, with no living family. She wanted to know her ancestry, where she came from. What she got instead was an email marked, "Inconclusive, further analysis required." A week later, the company contacted her directly. Unusual, she thought, for something so routine. The representative on the phone sounded nervous, even apologetic. He said her results had matched a restricted genealogical profile. When she pressed him, he said only, "You're connected to a family line we're not allowed to disclose." That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She went back through her old family photos. Her mother had always been quiet about their origins, saying only that her grandparents came from somewhere near the Smokies. But the faces, pale, gray-eyed, always a little too similar, now seemed different, familiar in a way that chilled her. When she requested her full report through a data leak site, she found the match listed under an archived family name, Hensley. From that moment, things began to unravel. Her mirrors started fogging on their own. She'd wake up to find words traced faintly in the condensation. Remember, her cat refused to stay in the apartment, and every night at 3:17 a.m., her phone camera turned on by itself. Claire began researching. She found the old newspaper articles, the police report, the missing persons cases. She found the name Samuel Hensley and a single grainy photograph from 1981. The man's face was long, pale, emotionless, but his eyes looked exactly like hers. When she told a friend about it, he joked that she'd found her haunted relatives. But a week later, that same friend stopped answering calls. His apartment was left unlocked. Inside, the only thing missing was a framed photo of Claire from her living room shelf. Some secrets wait for you to dig them up. Others dig their way to you. And now it seemed the Hensley bloodline had found her. Claire's decline was slow, like a candle burning out in silence. At first, she told herself it was stress, hallucinations, the byproduct of too many late nights chasing ghosts online. But denial only lasts so long when the evidence follows you everywhere. Her laptop began showing files she hadn't downloaded, folders labeled with dates she didn't remember. Inside were images of places she'd never been. The reservoir, the old Hensley house, a dirt road cutting through fog. In every picture, a faint figure appeared in the distance. Sometimes behind her, sometimes beside her. Always just out of reach. She went to the police once. They didn't believe her. The officer wrote down her story, then paused when he heard her name. "Hensley," he said quietly. "My grandmother used to tell that story." He folded the report, slipped it into a drawer, and said, "You should let sleeping ghosts stay asleep." But Claire couldn't. Something inside her pushed her forward, whispering, always whispering, "Go home." So she did. She found the location of Red Hollow, what was left of it, through an old mining map archived in a Knoxville library. The reservoir covered most of it now, but the shoreline still revealed broken chimneys and stone foundations when the water was low. She went there alone. The air was still, unnaturally still. The water didn't ripple, even when she stepped close enough to see her reflection. And that's when she saw it, behind her reflection, another face. Same eyes, same expression, watching. In that moment something shifted. The ground beneath her seemed to breathe. The trees bent slightly, as if exhaling. She looked down and saw movement beneath the shallow water, hands, pale and thin, pressing against the surface like glass. She ran, but the sound followed her. A heartbeat, heavy and rhythmic, pounding through the soil. She dropped her phone somewhere along the path, still recording. That recording was later found by a fisherman, tangled in reeds. The last 30 seconds are silent except for one sound. A woman's voice whispering, "It's in me now." After that, no trace of Claire Donovan was ever found. Her apartment was emptied by the landlord. No next of kin. No belongings claimed. Just one thing left behind, a cracked mirror leaning against the wall, and the words carved faintly into its frame. The blood sees itself. In the months that followed Claire's disappearance, the story spread quietly across the internet. Small forums, forgotten blogs, threads that vanished as soon as they were posted. People debated whether she was real, whether the photos were staged, whether the Hensley curse was just another creepypasta dressed up in history. But every so often, someone would appear claiming they had proof. A man from Kentucky uploaded a short video, grainy, handheld, filmed at night. He said he'd been hiking near the old reservoir when he saw candles flickering between the trees. The camera pans shakily, catching glimpses of white fabric and movement. Then, just for a second, a face, pale, expressionless, and those unmistakable gray eyes reflecting light like an animal's. The video was removed within an hour, his account deleted, but copies spread. The audio, when slowed down, revealed faint chanting under the wind. A single phrase repeated again and again, "Keep it pure." That phrase appeared elsewhere too, spray painted on abandoned barns, carved into tree trunks, written in chalk on underpasses near the state border. It became a kind of calling card for something people didn't fully understand. Some began connecting disappearances to the legend. A missing camper here, a journalist there. No bodies ever found, only empty tents, cold fires, and sometimes a cracked mirror left behind. By 2015, local authorities stopped responding to reports in that area altogether. Officially, it was due to unstable ground conditions near the reservoir. Unofficially, no one wanted to go there. The last search team reported hearing voices across the water, calling their names in familiar tones. When they returned to the shore, one member was missing. A year later, hikers found a small leather-bound notebook near the same location. The first page was blank except for a name, C. Donovan. The rest was filled with sketches, family trees, maps, symbols. The final page had a note written in rushed, uneven handwriting. "It doesn't end with me. It never ends. The blood remembers." And beneath those words, drawn in smudged pencil, were two serpents coiled around each other, just like in the letters found in 1962. Maybe the Hensley story was never a curse. Maybe it was something older, a memory wearing human faces, and every few generations it wakes up, searching for its reflection in whoever's left. They say time buries everything, the crimes, the shame, the blood. But the truth is, time doesn't bury, it preserves. Every secret, every sin, folded neatly into the soil, waiting for the next curious hand to dig deep enough to touch it. And now, the name Hensley has resurfaced once again. Not through gossip, not through rumor, but through data. Genealogy databases, family mapping apps, DNA kits. People across the country are connecting themselves to a past they don't understand. Some of those connections, a handful of them, trace back to the same hollow, the same families, the same blood. And some of those people, quietly, without making the news, have already gone missing. A tech worker in Denver, a nurse in Ohio, a college student in North Carolina, all three shared distant genetic markers from Appalachian Line 7AN. All three had sent off DNA kits between 2021 and 2023. Their profiles were quietly removed from the company's system within months. When one journalist tried to ask about the anomaly, the company responded with a single sentence: "Those accounts are not part of our active database." But somewhere, in private research networks, the data remains. Patterns of inheritance, frequencies of genetic mutation, traits, pale eyes, low melanin, high kinship ratios. It's all there. The bloodline didn't die. It adapted. It learned to hide. And that's the most chilling part. Because if the blood remembers, it doesn't just wait in places. It waits in people. It's carried unknowingly through veins into cities, into marriages, into children who will never understand why they sometimes wake up at 3:17 a.m., hearing voices they can't explain. Maybe they'll see flashes in mirrors that weren't there before. Maybe they'll hear humming in old houses, the same rhythm echoing through generations. And maybe, just maybe, one of them will stumble across this story. They'll listen to these words, their skin will crawl, and somewhere deep inside, something ancient will stir, something that recognizes itself. If that's you, you'll know. You'll feel it in your blood. Because the Hensleys were never just a family. They were a mirror, one that reflects anyone who dares to look too closely into their own past. And the reflection, it always looks back.